Okay, guys, I am back in the unfinished basement. So, anyway, I recorded in the dining room last week, and although maybe it looked a little bit better, the audio just didn't sound very good. So, I decided to shoot this in a place where I have actually a good sound setup. You can't see here, but I have a big blanket draped over a pull-up bar, and just the sound sounds better down here. So anyway, my apologies to people watching on video, because the video is gonna suck. As a benefit, kind of to make up for that, I'm gonna add some more interesting B-roll this week over the podcast. So if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you'll recognize some of this B-roll, but at least you're going to be able to see a little bit more of it. It's just going to be some of the drawings I've put on the channel before. Anyway, hopefully that'll be kind of interesting. One last little bit of housekeeping. Last week I mentioned I would post a link to an account of a interesting experience I had, kind of a transformative experience I had last year. I neglected to do that last time. That link should be up there now. It's going to be under this video too, so you guys can check that out and get up to date. Because it turns out as I'm editing these podcasts, I refer to it quite a bit, so you can feel free to check that out. My guest today is Dustin Hansen. Besides being the author of the newly released My Video Game Ate My Homework, don't know how you can see that. He also happened to be the guy who gave me my first break into video games, so I'm very grateful for Dustin for allowing me that first opportunity that ended up being a huge benefit and boon and resource to my growth artistically. So Dustin also just happens to be a really swell guy, an interesting thinker, and I really hope you enjoy our discussion. How to be an artist. Step 2. It takes 3 generations to make an artist. With guest Dustin Hansen. So how's it been going, man?
Oh boy, good, busy, crazy, but good.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff happening right now.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. A lot more than I've experienced with previous publication things.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of noise, and that's been nice. You know, we had, of course, some fun and interesting tour stuff booked and canceled because of
that's got to be a bummer.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw the article in the Trib though. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It was nice. I was surprised. I didn't expect it to be, to kind of get that kind of traction, to be honest. So it was really nice to see them pick it up, and they did a nice job. So
is that
share
something?
The cover with one of my heroes, so that was fun.
Oh, that's cool. Wait, you mean with your son?
Mark Eaton.
Oh, with Mark Eaton. Okay.
Yeah, it was so funny. To see him on the cover with me, it was like, oh wow, it's kind of funny.
I didn't see the print edition, so I didn't get the context with you and Mark Eaton.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it was kind of funny.
That's definitely something for Utah people will appreciate.
Yeah.
An OG jazz player.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's rad. So this has been a lot of stuff going on for promotion and stuff for the book.
Yeah, it's been really nice. Like I said, I've done other books, and the promotion has been 100% left up to me. It's just
interesting.
Every publisher is different, but DC has been super aggressive, and they're just so fun to work with, and it's been really fun to kind of get the word out a little bit, and
that's very different.
Yeah,
I've definitely my same experience. A lot of other, publishers, they may give you a lot of resources and here's a mailing list and stuff, but so did you reach out to do the trip thing, or was that DC's end?
They reached out for that one.
Really?
Yeah. Matter of fact, I reached out. I had been working with another publisher previous, and literally had to do everything. I'm not kidding.
No, I know how it is.
Not even a mailing list.
Oh, really? Jeez.
Yeah, matter of fact, even the first time when I sent out stuff to my previous publisher, I was like, I think I could get into these few places. And they're like, yeah, you can try, but some of them might require a budget, and we just, we're not going to back that, so it would be up to you. And, they
was
were
this with Game On?
Yeah.
Okay. Jeez.
So there was just nothing there. And the book's done okay. So I guess in their point of view, it's fine.
The
right?
calculations, it works, so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get all conspiracy theory on that, which we can get into. That might be kind of interesting, but
on why it did well, or what their whole point of it was.
Kind of how traditional publishers approach a product based on how much they've invested in it, and especially if they're publicly traded and wanting to make sure that they hit an expectation and don't exceed
Oh,
it too much versus don't go too under. And I'm sure for a book like mine, like my books don't matter in the grand scheme of things, especially for a big publisher like that. But
uh-huh.
I can see that being a reality. So it gets, frustrating.
So the idea is, what's the idea? The idea is that they can't spend a certain amount just for the, like, what's the conspiracy angle as far as
It probably comes from working at games for so long, right? And talking
yeah,
to finance people and
yeah,
and having things like well, if you come out and you say, okay, let's say you're an investor, let's say you buy stock in Activision, right?
yeah,
And they have a new game coming out, and you go to their quarterly report and they say, hey, we think this game is going to earn 10 million in the first quarter, and so you're like, great, here's my $100, whatever, right?
yeah,
Thinking, cool, when that earns 10 million, their stock price is going to go up by a point, and I'm going to get 110 back on my 100.
yeah,
All that sounds great, and from an investment standpoint, that's what you want, or at least that's what most people want, right?
yeah,
They want that predictable thing. But if it comes out and it does poorly, well, that sucks, right? But that's kind of the price you pay. But if it comes out, instead of making 10 million, it makes 50 million or 100 million, then you look at it as a lost opportunity cost, where you say, like, well, shoot, if I would have known it was going to do that good, I might have invested $1,000 or $10,000.
yeah.
So, there is some advantage for being predictable.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. That makes sense. You don't want to have regret on either side of things. You can kind of know
yeah,
exactly what something's going to do. It's a little bit safer,
yeah.
So,
And I know, like I said, that is so conspiracy theory. I don't think that's the truth. I can't imagine a publisher ever saying, we don't want this to exceed its potential.
uh-huh.
But, it's hard not to kind of start seeing those things when you
Well,
just feel like it could do better than it is.
people like to have a certain amount of stability,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to be able to predict things. I mean, it's like I said, yeah, you want to be able to make some predictions and have your predictions to actually, follow how you want them to go.
Yeah.
So, I think that's interesting though. Just, I don't think that's too uncommon for, artists to kind of be looking at this whole black magic of finance and marketing and just like trying to figure out how that interfaces with what they're trying to do, because as an artist,
Right.
we're always like, how can I make the best thing? I want to make, like, you're kind of solving two different problems,
Yeah.
and I think that's something I've really struggled with. For many, many years, I was just grumpy about that, because I was just like, I want to make art and have this other entity that wants something completely different, and it's very easy to get very bitter, working in a studio. But it seems like, at least observing you, it seems like that's something you've been able to manage pretty well. But I don't know, is that something? Is that a tension you felt, or how do you think about that?
Oh, I absolutely feel it.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's kind of the main reason I got out of doing full-time game development.
yeah,
I felt like such a tiny piece in a big cog, and I that's a tough one because I really do want to do the best creative output that I possibly can,
yeah,
and I think in general most employees do.
yeah.
Everybody does. But I don't know. Yeah, that's a tough one.
And there's definitely a way where those two things line up. Like, in an ideal
Yeah.
world, you make great art and great art sells, but there's a
Right.
lot of decisions kind of made, on the deck that are just kind of like, wow, what's going on here? And we saw a lot of stuff, the type of things where you see the investment that's put into a studio. I think a lot about, like, when we were both at EA, when EA was still very much still carrying a lot of the culture of Headgate. Now that's kind of when I
Yeah.
first started at EA, and just for those that don't know, Headgate was a studio that was bought out by EA and became EA Salt Lake, and Dustin and I both worked there, and that's when I started at EA, and I really loved the culture at that time, But you could
Yeah,
just,
me
over
too.
the years, you kind of watch that kind of deteriorated, and you see these teams and individuals where so much had been invested in them, and people really had great relationships, but suddenly kind of not seeing the value of those relationships, and people kind of being treated as items in a spreadsheet, you know. you see like some layoffs that just like really boggled your mind and things like that. But again, it's like, it's from a different vantage point. I'm looking from this vantage point as an artist. And then you have these other people that are like, how do we keep this business open and that is like paying people's salaries, So
yeah, there's a lot of competing objectives there, no doubt.
yeah.
I know. I mean, we're talking about finance here, which is kind of a weird thing. I didn't think we'd talk about that, but on that same topic, there is something there, and I've thought about this a lot. Matter of fact, I was having this conversation with my son last night about the definition of art is too broad for anyone to say, is art a good endeavor, right? It's like, we consider anything art, which is kind of an interesting thing. And I think the term art itself has just been kind of populated into any type of creative output.
Oh, sure.
Because I was talking, and the point I made about finances, I was talking to a finance guy at EA. I don't even remember his name, or I would probably say it because we're so far removed from EA, it wouldn't matter anyway. But I was talking to him. I do know the projects that we were on because the project I was on was being canned, and another project wasn't. And I felt like I owed it to myself and to the project to kind of be a champion and try to fight for it and try to see if it could save. And
this wasn't wildlife. Was that the?
This was it was wildlife and gardens both at the same time were being canceled. And
that's by the way, those are great examples, especially wildlife. A great example of that. Exactly the type of disappointment that can happen where you see a project that is just like so well conceived and elegant, and it's just like you knew once that went out into the market that people were gonna like, you sometimes just get a feel about a project, right, that it's gonna connect.
Yeah.
And it was one of those projects, and it was just unfortunate that it just didn't meet kind of the market needs of that time. Anyway, but I interrupted you.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is the market needs thing is exactly what this came up to, where I spent time and I argued with him and said, I don't get it, because when I'm doing I can do the math. I can look at the size of the market. I've done all this analysis too. I've read everybody's analysis. This project looks like it's viable. And he said, well, that's the exact problem. He said, because accounting is mathematics. And what we're talking about is finance, and finance is art.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. So he said, I'll be really blunt. I can make your project look great because I'm an artist. And he said, or I can make other projects that have more need within the studio look great because I'm an artist. So it was interesting to hear, this, he's a great finance guy to consider himself an artist, and the way that he presents those projects to fill the needs of the studio.
No, that's very, I can see that point of view is from finance. So like one of my little side interests has been like development. Like I'd love to be able to do some sort of like neighborhood scaled development in my neighborhood. And it's tough because I need the time to be able to do it, and you're trying to find the right property and whatever, but I've definitely like done my research on it. And it's interesting. Finance is a big part of it. So like one of the things you do is you have to put together like a pro forma, which is a document that basically shows like how the finances are going to shake out, to say like, hey, here's how much it's going to cost. Here's the revenue you're going to bring in. Right.
Right.
And one of the real interesting things, I went to a workshop with this guy kind of talking about the pro forma, and he's like, pro forma, here's the thing about a pro forma. Pro forma is Latin for making shit up. And once you play around with it enough, you're just like, I can understand that idea that, there's an art to it. You're kind of bullshitting. Like there's a lot of our financial market that is about like projections, like, oh, we're going to use this data from the past to project what's going to happen. No one knows any of this stuff. And we try to, that's created in finance of like, oh, here's this thing we can kind of count on, or here's this like stability, but there's a lot of making shit up. But I mean, that's what we do as artists. So like, I can't complain too much about finance. Yeah.
Right. But it is a part of like what we do as artists too, right? Because that's where our livelihood comes. And one of the things that's always been interesting to me, and I think you and I have actually talked about this at one point, about comp culture, where when it comes to people kind of getting behind projects or getting behind anything, it only works well if somebody's done it already. So like for my current one, Um, the comp that people keep saying
Uh,
is kind of ridiculous because it's really not a great match. But it's easy for someone to look at it and go, "Oh, this is like Ready Player One meets the Goonies."
yeah, I saw that. Someone posted that
Yeah,
on
it was
there.
like nice. I was like, "Oh, that's really cool," and that's actually something we've kind of been talking about internally too. And because it's
Yeah.
an easy one to do, when people look at that and
Hmm.
there's two good comps there. One is a financially good comp, and the other is like a spiritually good comp, right? And I can see the similarities. There's no doubt about it. But I don't feel like that's the right way to present a project. And it's too bad. And it's funny because I get I get kind of actually really worked up about this one because I do want art to just be validated on the content of art. Period.
Yeah.
Regardless of comps. Like the next project I'm doing with DC, I'm begging them to not put my name on the front cover.
Really?
Yeah. Um,
Why is that?
well, I don't think it helps. I know in my case it
Huh.
doesn't help, right? Like my name doesn't sell books, right? And I think at some point it might hurt.
What
Um,
about fame,
yeah,
Dustin?
yeah.
You need fame.
Well, that's the real truth. Is like I literally, honestly don't want it. And
Yeah.
I would love it if someone would look at it and go, "Oh, this looks interesting," and then they look in the inside and they finish the whole book. If they want to find out who wrote it, they could do some research and dig in. But I kind of think
Hmm.
that that's kind of the least important part of the whole project, and because I think your name gets comped too.
Sure.
My name gets comped with previous titles that I've done, and some of them have been great, some of them not so great. Um, you know,
Yeah, and that gets into the whole problem of like this is something that's a constant like tension for me too, is just creating a brand for
right?
yourself, which was such like a point of gospel when I was kind of entering into like self-publishing, that like you're a brand, your name's a brand, you're a company, you got to treat yourself as a company, you're an employee in your own company,
Right.
you know, all these ways of thinking about art that just are kind of like, you know, I'm a person that wants to it kind of ruins art, and it ruins like who you are as a creator, you know, that
Yeah.
you can't just be a person, that you have to have a certain way you present yourself in public, and you have to kind of hide the rest for, the rest of your life has to be kind of like a secret, or, and
Yeah.
there's something to be said for privacy and whatnot, but also just the hustle of like trying to, I don't know, for me I was very very much tied into like I have to always be putting work up onto social media and whatever, and that can be pretty exhausting.
Yeah. It is
um,
definitely.
So my question then would be, you talk about like comps and like, yeah, comparing to previous work, comparing to other things, which is clearly it's about marketing. It's a way for people to have a quick entry point where they're like, okay, I this is something where I think I'm familiar with. I can get into this, because obviously you can have a great piece of art, and everyone's had that experience where someone's like, you got to see this thing. I don't know how to describe this thing, but it's kind of, and people are trying to describe it, and it sounds weird what they're describing, but they're so enthusiastic. You're like, okay, I'll go check that out. And
Yeah.
then you see it and you're like, wow, I've never seen anything like that. And then you do the
Right.
same thing. You can't describe it either, which, I mean, a great piece of art is fantastic, and inspiring enthusiasm is fantastic, but there's definitely a big hump to get over. It's like, you got to get over that like marketing hump of like, how do you communicate that? So I don't know if you feel like there's a better alternative to the comp. I mean, you kind of suggested you feel there's a better way to do things than through the comp.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing because I actually don't think there is. And I think that's the frustrating thing the problem
Okay.
I have with it. Well, here's a good example. Like in the writing world, not just in the comic, art drawing world, query letters are a big
Yeah,
thing, right? So
sure.
when you finish a novel and you're ready to find an agent to help you out, or to go directly to a publisher, you write a one-page letter that kind of tells everyone what the book is, and maybe a paragraph on who you are and why you're the right person to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what a query letter is. Well, I've often thought that the query letter process is kind of silly, because that query letter process doesn't ever go to the end user, the
Yeah.
final person that reads your book. And that's, that whole chain of agent, editor, publisher, salesperson, that sells within the
Yeah.
publisher to the bookstore, whatever. Like the most important person in that entire process might be the writer and the bookseller.
Sure.
And so if they're not speaking
Yeah.
the same language, things can go pretty bad. So I've often thought, like, if I could send a query letter that was as small as, Ready Player One meets Goonies, and say that's the only message I want to push out. If I'm putting on my marketing hat, I would want to do that. To have something that consistent all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is one of those things where, those things do get parroted, and in the end, I guess that's a positive thing when it comes to book sales, or any type of sale.
Well, the truth is, almost any work you do, I mean, it's gonna be built off of, it's gonna be derivative of something.
Oh yeah.
And so in some ways, there's a certain amount of honesty in that. In some ways, it's just a way of signaling, like, here's the stuff I'm into. Here's the stuff I'm into that ended up making this thing. So if you kind of like the same stuff, maybe you'll be interested. Unfortunately, I chose for my last book. I chose to reference obscure Russian cinema, so that's a little bit smaller segment.
Right.
But then I was like, okay, but it's kind of like Star Wars, because there's this it's like this monk with the magic sword. So basically
Right.
Star Wars.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wish there was a better way to get out that ultra creative, completely unique stuff. I've been watching Midnight Gospel, the new Netflix.
Oh, I just watched the first episode of that. We just got into a few minutes of the first episode.
Well, the thing, it's interesting, right? It's got the right creators behind it. So some of that stuff where we talk about, like, building a platform or building, building your brand is an important part of why that kind of show gets an opportunity. It's definitely got that going for it. But it's unbelievably unique and bizarre. And
okay, does it work? I was wondering. I'm like, does this thing work?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, visually, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just super unique and creative, and I think my guess is that the main character, Clancy, is going to be the next Finn and Jake. It falls right in line with what he's done in the past, and then Duncan Trussell, the creator.
Yeah, I saw that. They're kind of the co-creators are Duncan Trussell and who's the Adventure Time
my
guy?
brain has turned off, but yes. Can you believe it's the
I know.
one I can't believe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm going to have to try. Anyway, there's another creator that's involved with it that I've followed for years too. It's a guy named Phil Henry.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Pendleton Ward. That's his name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pendleton Ward. Yep. Yeah, Phil Henry.
Phil
I haven't
Henry
heard before.
this is bizarre, but he used to have an old radio show. They actually had it in Utah on. Yeah.
Oh, Phil Henry. I know Phil Henry. That's I recognize it now. It's spelled like HENDRIE.
Yeah. So he's one of the creators of the project too.
Weird. I didn't realize that. And he's got his whole shtick was that he would be his own callers into the show, and so he'd speak and then turn on a filter and be a caller.
Completely ridiculous
and then
premise.
Switch back and forth.
Every show, and then he would. And even before, every time he'd start a segment, he'd say stuff like, guys, this is me. I'm faking this whole thing. The whole thing is a joke. But I can keep saying that because there are idiots all over the planet that will call in, and people would call in.
Okay, I didn't realize that. That makes it even more interesting to me. So I'll have to, check it out. He's also the voice of Principal Vagina in Rick and Morty.
Oh, I did not know that. Oh, how funny. Not surprised,
Anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, it's I'm hoping places like Netflix will become kind of a safe haven for some of those more bizarre and unique, especially on the animation side. To see some of those things pop out.
It's such an interesting vehicle and format, because I feel like at the same point I feel like sometimes Netflix is going the way of TLC, where they're just starting to create this really trashy stuff. But then there's still this really inventive, edgy stuff that they're doing too.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's a weird beast. I'm very curious to see how that evolves over time.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'll have to check it out. I mean, I mean, you know how things are. It's a little bit different because you got older kids. Mine are more youngins now,
Yeah.
so finding the time when I can break away and watch something that I don't want them to be watching is,
Oh yeah, especially
is a little bit trickier.
especially something like that where visually and they might be attracted to it, and content wise,
I watched
no,
it.
it's not for not for the meek.
Not for
Yeah.
kids. I started watching it, and then like my daughter was like, "Dad, what's this? What are you watching?" And I'm like, oh, "Okay, I gotta shut this off."
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, well, have you heard of psychedelics? Because we can start that conversation.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think I just watched the first couple of minutes of the first episode where it was like the president in like zombie land talking about pot and opioids, and that's as far as
and did you know it's actually his podcast? It's actually Duncan Tressel's podcast.
I was wondering if they're taking clips straight out of his podcast.
Yeah. So every time
putting it in
before
there.
it starts, it's got that main character Clancy kind of like goes on this virtual reality trip. Like, where do you want to go next? And it pulls up one of the podcasts from his show. So it's all pre-recorded stuff. So that was with Dr. Drew Gooden, who's the guy who's the president in that one.
Oh, okay.
So you can go and
and that's like some real guy.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, he's like he's kind of a radio host, doctor guy. He did the big Adam Carolla show for years.
Oh, that's right. I remember who that dude is. Okay.
And he's
All
a
right,
great
sense.
radio voice. He's super smart and it's interesting, but
Yeah.
it was bizarre to sit there and see the president of the United States shooting zombies while he's talking about the positive and negative sides of legalized marijuana and
legalized marijuana.
Like, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. My my dad is a conservative, very Mormon guy. Just got back from a mission as a mission president.
Wow.
Where he's basically for those that aren't aware, the mission president is kind of like the leader for a bunch of 20-something kids who are Mormon missionaries. But it was interesting, like asking him about the whole like marijuana thing, and he had a very nuanced viewpoint. And he's part of it is he was a doctor, and so I was like, yeah, I've seen some of the research, and maybe this and maybe this, but it was pretty interesting how balanced he was. He's like, yeah, it's been shown to have some analgesic effects in these cases, but so he was the Dr. Drew. In that.
Yeah. Yeah, that is
Got to make a lot of the same points.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. We were talking a little bit about like finances and how that affects being an artist, and it's kind of this unavoidable part of it, which is kind of frustrating as an artist, because in some ways you don't want to have to think about that.
Right.
You just want to like focus on doing your thing, but it's an inevitable part of it. You have to like address it at some point. Like you have to figure out how to eat.
Yeah.
But I think it's particularly challenging, in the case of having a family and being a father and being like, okay, I need to like provide for my family. So I'm really curious about how you've tried to strike that balance, whether it's trying to find some sort of harmony between making art or finding space for art. And you've been doing that for a long time. So I'd be interested in kind of your process, like where you are now and maybe how you got there as far as paying the bills and making art.
Yeah, man, that's a great question. Yeah, it's interesting because another part of that, if to put that in perspective, is 2 of my children are going to be making a living in the arts. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
That's right. And you actually work with your kids too. So that's a whole other level.
Yeah, my older son, Tanner, I don't know where he'll end up exactly. I'm sure he'll end up somewhere in the biz dev side of things. He's a brilliant artist, and he's struggling with that. Davis, who helped me with the colors on this current book and my next one, does it more like a hobby. I think he's got the most healthy approach, if I'm being really honest, where he's like, yeah, I really like doing the coloring. That's as far as I want to take it. It's a job. But my daughter is, she wants to be an actress, and, she's got her first professional job this year that's been canceled because of COVID. And, it's like tough, right? All those things can just completely change, in a moment. And
well, the fact that you have not they've grown up with you being an artist and it hasn't scared them from making art is like interesting, first of all. So
Yeah, you know Yo-Yo Ma, right? The cello player.
yeah,
So
yeah.
his autobiography is fascinating. It's really, really good. I highly suggest it. One of the things of all the sticking points, and I probably read it 20 years ago. It's been out for a long time. It's not a new book. One of the things that always stuck with me was they have this concept in Chinese culture for arts where it says it takes 3 generations to make an artist.
Wow.
And so his example of that is he's the artist for his family. He's the representative artist for his family. So his grandfather was a cello and violin maker. His dad was a music teacher, an educator. And it took the support of those 2 people to be able to fund and understand the business well enough to turn Yo-Yo Ma into a professional.
Oh, cool.
It's a really interesting concept. And so some of that, I think, like I look at it like my dad was a violinist and an educator. I've made my living as an artist one way or another. We'll get back to that original question. It's like, how is always a great question. And it's been interesting to me to see my oldest son in particular take a very metered approach to being a professional artist. And some of that is from watching me struggle. And I've been super open with him about financially, how those things happen and, when they're good and when they're bad, and how the importance of trying to pack a few dollars away and how impossible that can be. And, all those kinds of things. So I think he's taking a much more, his approach to getting involved in a family situation, with finding someone to be responsible to, has been a lot
probably much more
different than mine was
cautious
when I was
about
in my
that.
20s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, so it's interesting. I think things definitely change, and I know when I started off, my initial goal was to do exactly what I'm doing now at the age of 50, which is to illustrate books. It's like it only took me 30 years to get to a point where I'm doing it, right? And your life can be packed with regrets, or you can just, for me, I don't regret what I've done. Jumping into the games industry, it was good for me for financially for a long time, and I met amazing people, and there's so many benefits to doing that. I think it helped me become a better storyteller.
Yeah.
It helped me try to understand things like finance and some of those things that I might not have understood if I just jumped right into the
however like bitter I am about however bitter I was about working in video games, which while I was in video games I was just so grumpy the whole time. It's in a lot of ways when I was working for a living, that was really my schooling. I learned so much.
Me too.
At the 2 studios I worked at, or actually, there's 3 studios that I really worked at. So there's really that kind of being paid to be an artist. I think that's one of the real benefits is there's some really amazing opportunities for growth, for meeting other people, if at some point, and the hope is I think for most people that have that plan is that helps to build some sort of foundation or space that then you can go do your own art at some point. So, but everyone's path is different. That's why I kind of ask you about yours, because it's people are oh, what should I do to become an artist? And it's dude, just whatever way you can figure out, that's the way you become an artist,
Yeah. Well, I think, it comes kind of back to that same term of what is art,
Yeah.
that whole thing. It's I'll put this, here's an interesting thing. And this because you worked with me during this time, but there was a 10-year period where I didn't draw a single thing. So if there's anything I regret, it's that.
Sure.
Where, for me financially to be able to support so that my wife could go back to school and take care of the kids full time and not have to have a job, it meant I had to stop doing art and move into more of a management position. Where I was profoundly unhappy.
Oh, really?
I hated it. I was never happy doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, you still were creative director for a lot of that time, but you feel like even as creative director, it was still too far abstracted from the making of art.
Yeah, I mean, I would go home every day and make my own art because I wasn't getting fulfilled in my career.
Yeah.
And even though I still do some of that today, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll work on my book full time, and I do some consulting with a couple of groups and do those kinds of things. And after I'm done with my day, I'll go home and I work from home, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll return to my office and I'll do my own creative weird stuff that I just want to experiment with. But that's different, right? I felt like I
Yeah.
wasn't getting anything, you know,
Sure.
I wasn't hitting that process of creating. Um, so I missed that.
Yeah.
I was jealous of guys like you and Gibbs that got to draw during the day.
Sure.
Um,
Which
yeah,
which is ironic because I felt like I was in the position again, Mr. Bad Attitude. It was like I was doing that work, and then at home I would go at home at night and I'd want to do my own work, but just feel like exhausted because
you were done.
you're
Yeah.
done because you've tapped those resources so much, and really to do well like within games as an artist. Like it's something you kind of need to take with you. So it was the type of thing where you take
Hmm.
problems home with you and you're thinking about it and you're like researching it and it just you want to do something that's better and inventive and interesting, and so um, it's hard. You really can get yourself in this rut that can be hard to get out of, and be like, oh wait, I got to step away from this rut and now like figure out a different problem, and
Right.
yeah. Um, I'm kind of curious. So I remember, I mean, you mentioned kind of not being kind of miserable during that time. I posted an article a little while ago about my experience with depression and meditation, and you
Yeah.
commented on it in a way that gave me the impression that it was something that you related to, but you really didn't elaborate much on that. I mean, is that something you've
Yeah.
had experience with
Yeah.
too, or
Oh, no doubt. I mean,
yeah,
I didn't want to comment on your post because I felt like it was a very personal post,
uh huh,
but I mean, other than to say, yeah, I get it. Like,
yeah,
oh, no doubt about it. I mean, I've say very, very similar
yeah,
experience where, I've tried just about every type of medication I can possibly get.
uh
I've
huh,
I've had positive and negative of response to speaking with professionals about it. Sometimes it's
mm-hmm,
great. Most of the time, I find myself that I'm a phenomenal liar and I'll lie to whoever when I'm in that position.
uh huh,
Talking to a psychiatrist or to anyone, I have a hard time digging in and really finding because I don't know, I don't value it for some strange, stupid ass reason.
mm-hmm,
Um, so yeah, I've gone through all that, like every piece of that, like contemplating being done with everything, all of those
yeah,
things.
yeah,
And I think, it's probably more common than we ever realized. So I was so grateful for your piece because it just really made me, it made me feel not quite so isolated in that secret that I've held forever. That yeah, there was a point where I was ready to do anything I had to alleviate the pain.
yeah. I was quite surprised by that. I mean, I was meant to write something about trying to describe how transformative this experience was for me, but it was kind of like until I had that experience, I didn't realize how depressed I was, and so I had to go back and be like,
Yeah,
okay, I have to explain like how bad the depression was. But that was one thing that really struck me was it's how many people respond to that were just like, yeah, it seems like a very universal experience that many people have, you know, although I'm sure
yeah,
it manifests in lots of different ways. And it was surprising to see you in particular comment because all my interactions with you, you've always been like so enthusiastic and warm and like generous and, you know, and also I see like you're always busy doing stuff. And for me, like when I have really low times, it's like I'm just clocking out. Like I'm not making stuff, you know? So,
yeah.
I mean, how is that like for you? How does that like affect you as an artist? Is there like a connection between, um, like your impulse to make art and however that depression might manifest for you?
Oh, no doubt about it. Matter of fact, I've I can make parallels in my life to when I was the most productive,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those times were the lowest points in my life. Um,
Really?
oh yeah, and
That's really
usually what
interesting.
happens is I find that for me, art becomes a form of seeking validation,
Hmm.
right? I try to be the kind of guy that's like, oh, I don't share stuff or whatever, but yeah, every time I do, it's because I want somebody or a million somebodies to tell me I'm great.
Of
You
course. I
know?
mean, that makes
I wish
total
I
sense for
wish I
me.
could say right. I wish I could say I wasn't that, but that's who I am. And so sometimes when I get real low, it's like if I keep creating, if I keep getting better, if I keep working on myself, I will maybe that will help. And part of that is totally misdirected because there are other things I should be working on instead of this output obsession that
Yeah.
I have, because that's really what it is. You know,
Yeah.
it's not uncommon for me in those times to work 18, 19 hours, sleep for 3 or 4, work another 18, 19,
Oh,
get my
geez.
cycle completely messed up. And, to a point where, there has to be an intervention. And luckily I have a wife that understands that, and she'll, say like, whoa, 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 you got to stop.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it becomes habitual, and there's a lot to that, of that.
Yeah. I have the kind of this theory about like the connection between like mood disorders and art, that it's like this um it's kind of this what's the word to say it? It's this like trigger that allows humans to discover new things, you know? You basically have a certain segment of the population that's kind of just like dissatisfied with things, you know? Which I think that's what motivates a lot of what I do. Is I look around and growing up, I'm like, there's something. I've grown up in the suburbs. I'm like, there's something not right about this, you know, or whatever it is. Like you go to school and you're like, there's something not right about
Right.
this, you know, and or you see other art and other things and you're like, there's something not right about this, and you get your mind working. You're like, okay, I wanna make my version of this, you know, I wanna create something new and something different. And then enough people do that and suddenly have this big engine of artistic innovation. But unfortunately for artists, it's not a great experience to go through.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
I've never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. The thing to me that I've kind of thought in that same, it's in kind of in that same family is it's back to that. Gosh, I'm really struggling with the term of art a lot. It's something I need to define in the next little while because it's driving me nuts. But
uh-huh.
I've the thing that's hard with me is there's such a difference between the creator and the receiver when it comes to art.
Yeah,
Of any form of art. Dance, theater, art, visual art, whatever. Right?
yeah,
Because for the receiver, it's usually a benefit.
yeah.
That's why we like art. Like, I love to look at your books because I feel they're satisfying to me, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
get something. I feel like I'm learning a little bit about who you are in a lot of different ways, right? Like all
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. But I think for the general public, which, and by the way, the numbers are completely out of balance. It's like what, 1 to 1 million, 1 to a
yeah,
100,000, 1 to 10,000 maybe. But they're pretty big numbers, right? The creator versus the receiver.
yeah,
And the thing that's frustrating with me with this is the thing that I've always tried to figure out how to do, because the concept of cost is so different for a creator than it is for a consumer.
oh, absolutely.
Where a con- right, like cost to me, it's like, how much would it charge? How much would it cost for me to draw a portrait of your family in my style? Well,
Yeah,
shit, I don't know. Like, do I like you? Well, then it's probably pretty low.
yeah,
Right? Or is this going
yeah.
to be an emotionally taxing thing for me? Well, I just
Mm-hmm.
won't do it. Like, there is no limit for that kind of stuff. And I've had those thoughts so many times. And when I talk about being profoundly unhappy at a place like EA, it's
Yeah,
because of that. Like, where I was forced constantly to give up that cost, or to give a piece of myself
yeah.
doing stuff that maybe didn't align with what I want to do, to a point where there were other areas of my life that were impacted. I
Sure.
honestly felt like I was going through some type of PTSD for probably 5 years after leaving the games industry.
Oh, geez.
Like,
Dude,
I felt that.
I had to recover too. I mean, honestly, that's like, I left to make my book, and I was
Yeah,
very serious depression for quite a while after that. I was like,
really.
oh, hey, I'm going to get out here and like make my thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just like can't even put like pencil to paper. Um, but I don't know. I don't know if you've had this experience. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm guessing one of the things that can kind of happen, though, one of the kind of happy accidents about making art is, I think you can start for some very insecure reasons. Like I was thinking about this today. Like the whole reason I decided to become an artist was because, all right, I wasn't naturally athletic. I wasn't naturally good at schoolwork. Like my earliest memories were just like sucking at both those things. And it's like, there's this one thing I could do well. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to do anything in my life having to do with academics because I know I suck at school. You know, I'm not going to be doing sports because I suck at that. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be an artist. Like I like through exclusion, I decided like, and then along the way, I'm like, oh, hey, you know, it's kind of fun too. This could be really awesome and I could do cool things. But at some point along the way, as I'm making art and trying to show off and get attention, and just finding that to be completely dissatisfying, you know, I got to a point where it's like, okay, you know, fuck all that. What really matters to me, you know? And it's like that getting pushed to that limit. It's like you go to a place and it's like, all right, I want to tell a story that matters to me, and is not trying to impress anyone else, you know? And once I did that, it's like, okay, I could work on something and create something that was like, for the first time in my life, and even though maybe I'm still depressed or whatever, I'm creating something that's satisfying, you know. And it feels great to have other people like appreciate that, to have other people that you admire look at that and say like, oh, hey, this is good, you know, like I really like what you're doing here. Like that feels good. So I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say that in this process of whatever drives us to art, it can drive you to something that's really good and healing and may actually make life bearable, you know, if you like search enough.
Okay, what I was going to say is similar to that. And I had a very, very similar experience. And part of it is, you know, perspective. You know, you and I aren't just popping out of college. You know, we've been doing this for a little while, and that would be a whole other topic, by the way, too. But
yeah,
being young and being an artist versus being old and being an artist is remarkably different.
Yeah.
But I'll quickly tell a story, and then you can tell me to stop telling weird stories. But when I decided I wanted to write while I was at EA, and part of that was, you know, I had a very interesting relationship with my dad. I won't say it was good because that would be really unfair. But I think we loved each other, but I don't think we liked each other, which is an interesting thing, right? Like,
sure.
And I think that's pretty common. Like, I'm not unique there. I don't hold any big scars because of that. Like, I'm not saying that. That's just the reality of our situation. And, you know, I had a hard time reading. I was terrible at school. And I asked for help and didn't get it. And I think part of it was the time period and the small school district that I went to. Like,
sure.
You know, it was one of those
things.
Did
you grow up in Ephraim too?
Yeah. Moved here when I was in the 3rd grade.
So you grew up there.
Kind of
yeah.
Yeah. You know, my dad was a very good person and supported a lot of people, but he didn't support me, which I know that sounds weird, right? And he challenged me. He would be like, I don't know if you should do that. You know, I wanted to be an artist. And he's like, don't be an artist. You know, teach. It's so much more predictable. You know, I mean, stuff like that. And part of that was just his own experience with trying to be a professional violinist, right? It was painful for him. He just never achieved that goal that he set. So this is a long way for me to say it took me a long time to realize I was pursuing the wrong goal from art in general. And some of that came from trying to prove my dad that I could do it. You know, I know that was a part of it. But probably a bigger part of it was that I set my goals based on a social version of what a successful artist is. And for me at that point, it was getting a book published. That's all. That's as far as I went. Like, I'm going to publish. And part of that was like I struggled with this concept of object permanence in video games. When we make them, we spend, you know, obscene amount of time doing them, and there's nothing left a year after. It's like they're invisible. They never happened. And so some of it was that, and but probably the bigger part of it was like I just wanted to get published. So when I did get an agent and we were shopping things around and we weren't able to sell the book that I had written that I was the most proud of, still to this date, it's the most, in my opinion, the best thing I've put on paper, and we weren't able to sell it. One day I was actually in the hospital when I emailed my agent, and I just said, I'm tired of this. Like, I'm tired of trying to sell something that's, you know, I just want to get published. So let's do something. Like, and I had drawn a couple of these little drawings of those microsaurs That's another book product
Mm-hmm.
that I did. And I said, it's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids meets Jurassic Park. And she said, I can sell that today. Right? That's a super marketable idea. And that's what it was for me. I was like, awesome, let's do it. So I spent the next couple years of my life developing a story simply for the concept of selling it. And
Yeah.
I think when you look at the sales of that book series, it shows, right? My
Hmm.
heart's just not in it. It's not
Yeah.
good. I mean, I can be objective about it and look at them and go, they're not good. And I get that. And so what's changed with me, and it had to be me cutting a lot of ties, cut ties with my agent, cut ties with, with a lot of different things, and just said, I've got to get back to writing what is more meaningful to me and creating stuff that's meaningful to me.
Yeah.
So same thing. And, this new project I have, even though it's kind of goofy and it's super marketable, is very meaningful to me.
Good.
Right? The kid's dyslexic. I'm dyslexic. It goes through a lot of that whole thing of the invisible disabilities, and it's super meaningful. And then the next two projects that I'm doing are even more meaningful to me,
Jeez.
including the one that she could never sell, and my other agent sold it in like a weekend. And I think it was all about timing. Yeah.
Is that Sherwood? I remember seeing you showed me the pitch to Sherwood a while
Yeah.
back.
So Sherwood, DC picked that one up, and they just announced that a few days ago.
Was that your original pitch that you were trying to get sell, or was it another one? Okay.
No, there was another one. I had one that I had written called, I can talk about this, but I haven't announced it yet, so you can share it. It's no problem.
Okay.
I wrote a book called The Legend of Berg Venig, and it's about a giant.
Mm-hmm.
He's the last giant, or so he thinks, and he's persecuted from the just because of the stories of the giants of the past. Even though he had nothing to do with them, he's just constantly living in the shadow of these other giants. So that's kind of the one I always wanted to tell. And there's no doubt, I know if my psychiatrist heard this, she would be like, yep, that's you and your father. I get it. Right? It's not very veiled. But it was an important book to me, and it probably won't make money. That's fine. It's like my goals have changed. Instead of a goal of being published or a goal of working in the games industry, my goals became more intrinsic and more centered, and I'm happier.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I feel like I've been slowly following the same arc, and maybe that is the matter of just being an older artist. I mean, maybe there's some wiser youngins that get to that quicker, or maybe it is a matter of the third generation.
Yeah,
how did you say it before? The Yo-Yo Ma thing? It takes 3 generations to make an artist?
3 generations. Mm-hmm.
It's just might be just a delicate enough thing to do that it takes kind of that much experience passed on from one generation to the next till people get like, oh, okay, here's the dance. Here's the dance you need to walk. Here's how you navigate it. But I think that's one thing that young artists, I don't know if I would say that they miss it. Some do. I mean, some definitely know the story they want to tell, but making art for the right reasons, that can be a hard thing to get to. But I felt like as soon as I was making art for the right reasons, that selling it came much more easily. And part of that's just finding that right place. You worked with Sam Nielsen, didn't you? Did you ever work with him?
Yeah.
Okay. Sam Nielsen has this really great thing that he says, talking about like when he's encouraging young artists, and he has like his Venn diagram where one half of the circle is like the stuff that you love, and the other half is like what's going to sell, and finding that intersection, Yeah. And I've thought a lot about that. It's a very kind of simple way of thinking about it, even though it's very accurate. Finding that intersection is not simple. You may think you have found that intersection, and it turns out that it's actually an intersection with what sells and your insecurities,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But finding that actual intersection of like this stuff that you can really do well, where there are people that it speaks to, like that's the golden ticket as an artist, is like finding that stuff. But it really starts with having the balls to be like, okay, I'm gonna try to tell a story that matters to me,
Right. Yeah. And that's tough.
Yeah.
You're right. It does take balls to do that.
Yeah. Well, it helps to have a good agent too. If you can find someone that can be a champion for you,
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But imagine the advice you'll be able to give to Gray.
Yeah.
Right? No, seriously, like if he chooses to be an artist,
Yeah.
like the advice you'll be able to give to your son after you've spent that time is invaluable. Like
Mm-hmm.
he'll be able to learn more from watching you and from talking to you about subtle things than ever. And then someday he'll come up and say something to you, and you'll be like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I could have had that complex of thought." Like,
Yeah.
you know, like once again, Tanner and I were a couple days ago. We were talking about, well, we were comparing two artists. We were comparing Nathan Fox. Are you familiar with his work?
I'm not, no.
He does a comic called Weatherman that you must see.
Okay.
Oh
I've heard
my
about it. I've heard about
gosh.
Weatherman.
The art is just phenomenal, and the writing's good too. And he
Mm-hmm.
didn't do the writing. The writing is really really good, but the art is just outstanding. Like his
Okay.
understanding of perspective is phenomenal.
That's an image book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So we were talking about him and Scott Robertson. The
Mm-hmm.
famous industrial designer.
Okay.
Kind of
Oh yeah, yeah.
that guy.
I learned
Right?
a
And we
ton
were
from
talking.
Scott Robertson.
Yeah, me too. He's phenomenal, right? And I
Yeah.
pushed those books in front of Tanner's nose young and said, you got to learn this kind of stuff. And Tanner said, you can go down the rabbit hole of learning how to draw like Scott Robertson. And you can buy a 10-point, what are those measuring devices called? Like the perspective 10-point measuring device, spend $300 on the
sure.
right one. And,
Yeah.
you can do all those things and you can become the perfect, you can learn how to draw like Scott Robertson. But the
Yeah.
question is why?
Yeah.
Like that's a really, really good question to ask is because, when we were studying Nathan Fox's work and looking at it and going, you can see quite often when he switches from panel to panel from 5-point to back to 2-point perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really common thing that he does. And you're like, yeah, but it's not right. Like it's not perfect.
Yeah.
You can recognize that he understands what he's doing, but he's not drawing all those perspective lines. He's just doing it. And it's one of those things, like it's really mind opening to me to go like, yeah, sometimes I pursue things just because I want the understanding of something,
Yeah.
but I'll go too far down the rabbit hole to like, I'm going to nail this fundamental and for what?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's funny. A while ago, just as a project, I wanted to study frames from The Secret Life of Arietti. Have you seen that Ghibli film?
Oh yeah. Oh,
one of my favorite Ghibli. I mean, I love Miyazaki, and this one just like kicks the ass of so many of Miyazaki's masterpieces. Such a beautiful film. One of the things I love about it is just the change in point of view from the little people to the big world, And so I was really fascinated about like what are they doing here with perspective to get that change of scale. Like the change of scale was so fantastic. They just felt like totally different worlds. And it has to do with like sound design and stuff too. But anyway, so I took some frames and I was drawing over some frames from Secret Life of Arietti to try to understand the perspective. And like nothing goes to vanishing points. Like it does it if Scott Robertson were to analyze it, it would be like, this makes no sense. There's no perspective here. But it still works. And I don't know if that's a sense of them, clearly, and I think Miyazaki actually did the storyboards for Secret Life of Arietti.
Oh, really?
So there is this sense of, first of all, you don't need to be perfectly mathematical with that stuff, right? Like,
yeah.
And you don't need to go all the way down the rabbit hole. And if you can get something to feel right, then it is right,
Right.
But, and there's this idea of art being a tool and just understanding, okay, what's, and I think it really helps to actually be kind of lazy. You can call it lazy or you can call it strategic as an artist, to be like, what's the laziest way I can do what I want to do, How can I accomplish what I want to do with the least amount of effort? Just because there's a cost to it,
Right. Especially with something the size of a graphic novel. Like you're only going to finish 20 of those in your life if you start young.
Jeez, if you're lucky, yeah.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, I think I'm going to start using strategic. I think that's a good way to put it because I cheat.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just, for me, I'm it's hard for me to get the motor started, So it's just like, I'm like a shitty old car that's hard to get started. And if you let the engine start, you have to go through the whole process. So it's like when I sit down to work, I want to find a way to do things that's going to, not waste my time. But, that being said, it's like being strategic in such a way. I want to give a certain impression, and sometimes the minimum necessary force to give that impression is something that's, extremely difficult to pull off, so.
Right.
It's not always simple. So.
No, I totally feel that. Yeah.
So I'm kind of interested in, I think that question is great, is that Tanner asked of like, you're going to learn how to do that, but why? I mean, that's for any artist, any young artist, I think that's a great, just like, personal kind of psychological, spiritual question to ask,
Yeah.
which it's easy to have quick answers. I'd be interested, what kind of conclusions did you guys come to when you had that discussion? I'd be interested kind of what he was thinking as he kind of thought through that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually don't know if we ever came to a conclusion on it, other than the fact that I know it was a multiple hour conversation of, I mean, it went from that to like, both Tanner and I are kind of in a similar vein to you, where we're questioning some spirituality and
Sure.
stuff like that. So like that went to this whole thing of like, is religion and art, they have a lot involved, especially if you only follow one particular version of art. Like if
Sure.
I'm gonna sit in the Scott Robertson camp, and is that directive or is it proper? Like so I mean I think it kind of went to that point of like, maybe it is okay to be more broad and to be able to go after a lot of endeavors when it comes to visual understanding and like how to create visuals, and and really the end of the why for me being my age has then like, it's got to be satisfying. And I know that's such a broad category, like, but that's really what it is. Like if I don't enjoy it, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah, that's a really insightful, simple way to say it.
Yeah, and for him it was, I've got to get better, which I think that's the combination between old and young too.
Yeah, I mean that's at a certain point in your life that is where the focus needs to be.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
At a certain point, like and early on, I think it's very important for a lot of things in life. You need to have a tunnel vision in a lot of ways. You have to be a laser gun and just be like drilling. And I don't know when it happens, like when you really know the change has to happen, but at some point you have to stop shooting this super focused laser at the target, and you have to like open up and be broader and say like, okay, what are the opportunities, because that tunnel can be, it's like very, very powerful, but it limits you, and it helps you get to a certain point, but it's at a certain point, if you don't broaden and look to the periphery, you're going to miss the opportunities, you're going to miss some insight. And I think that's kind of, as you get older, that's the area you have to get into, is to be like, okay, let's look at the vista. Let's look at this vista and look at the landscape around. I don't know. That's kind of how I feel, where I feel I'm at lately,
Yeah. No, I really like that. Yeah.
But I think in general, the thing that I'm really exploring a lot lately, which you kind of touched on, is that there's a spiritual aspect to making art. Like art is a spiritual practice, which is difficult. This is the problem, is that here people that want to dedicate their lives to it, it's the spiritual practice, and yet we have to make a living, and those two things, it's like oil and water, right?
Yeah. They are.
And I haven't figured out exactly what that means. In what way is it a spiritual practice, especially as I've done more dedicated, like contemplative practice, and seeing kind of the areas of the mind you can explore there, but then realizing like, hey, something's going on with art and imagination, that there's an intersection there with these other things,
Yeah, I would, if we ever do another one of these. Yeah, that's an area that is just endlessly fascinating to me. Yeah, because it's one of those things that I don't think you can have a understanding of that until you've kind of gone through some things in your life. Like perspective plays such an important part of that concept. It's like, yeah, that's a big one. That's a big concept. It's kind of a mind-blowing one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should leave it at that. That's probably maybe a
Yeah.
good place to end. A lead into a future one. That seems like this is like a common point we're getting to with a lot of these discussions I've been having. But dude, I think it's an interesting place to look, and there's a lot to explore. So, but yeah, anything else you want to maybe talk about? I mean, if you can maybe give a little more details on the book release for those that are interested. And
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my one it's today, the 28th, is the actual official release.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a total nightmare. It's moved every day. Some people were getting the books on like the 10th of April, and it all had to do with shipping and getting books from China, and it's just been a mess. But today is the actual release of my book. It's called My Video Game Ate My Homework. It's a project with DC, which has been a blast because I'm such a big DC fan. I have been my entire life. And the best thing I will say about the project is that DC didn't just enable me to be creative. They pushed me to a point where I got to do stuff that I've always wanted to do and didn't realize I was able to do it.
Oh, so that's very cool.
They were
now, is it canon?
Partner.
Is this part of the DC canon? The DC?
Nope.
No, okay.
Mm-mm. No, and that was kind of part of it too. Is it's one of those things where when I started, I'm like, oh my gosh, like from a writing perspective, like Neil Gaiman and Tom King and Alan Moore and all these guys who've written for DC, and like I'm just me, like I can't handle this, and so I put tons of pressure. And then of course on the visual side, I went through the same practice, right? Like, so it was nice to just kind of, they were patient with me and they trusted in me to build the right book, and they've just been an incredible partner. So it's easy to find, just search My Video Game Ate My Homework in your preferred browser. If you're a nice person, you'll buy it from an indie bookstore and not that evil Amazon company.
Yeah.
I adore the King's English in Utah. That's a great place. Call them. They'll ship it to you.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. That's a good idea. Yeah. I haven't gotten around to pre-ordering yet. So I was thinking I was going to go through Black Cat, even though I know the owner of Black Cat was pretty frustrated with something. He's frustrated with DC for some reason, having to do with how they're doing orders or something. But
oh, really?
I don't know. So maybe he'll have an issue with ordering it, and they'll have to go through King's English. But,
yeah, they're good. They're a good alternative for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, support your local indie comic book shop and bookstore, man. That's where it's all about.
Cool. All right, Dustin. Well, it was awesome chatting with you. I'm glad we could do this.
Yeah, for sure.
My little admission is I'm just like really shitty at like connecting with people for no reason. So I have to think up projects like this to give me an excuse to do it.
I am as well.
But I mean, that's kind of one of my ulterior motives is, I just want to connect with people that I think are interesting. And I always feels great chatting with you. So, yeah, we'll have to do a round 2 and get a little bit deeper into some stuff
I would love
time.
to talk about that creative space of where does art live within kind of the omniverse, and how do some people are more in tune with art than others, and like I would love to talk about that kind of stuff. It's fascinating.
All right, awesome, man.
So
great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You've been listening to How to Be an Artist. To support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/H2BNA.